Imagine this. You're inside a tube the size of a minivan. No seats, no bathroom, just you and 4 other people crammed together on the floor. Outside, complete darkness. And above you, nearly 2.5 miles of crushing ocean water. This was the reality for 5 people on June 18, 2023. They paid $250,000 each, $250,000 for the adventure of a lifetime, a chance to see the Titanic with their own eyes. Among them, a father and his 19-year-old son, Shahzada and Suleiman Dawood. A British-Pakistani businessman and his teenage son, bonding over a shared love of exploration and history. 4 days later, the world would learn they never made it back. This is the story of the Titan submersible disaster. 5 lives lost, 1 catastrophic failure, and the red flags that everyone ignored.
No one talks about them. Please subscribe so they're remembered.
Before we dive into what happened, and trust me, we're going deep, we need to talk about who these people actually were. Because they weren't just headlines. They were real people with real lives, real dreams, and real families waiting for them to come home. Shahzada Dawood, 48 years old, a successful businessman, vice chairman of Engro Corporation, one of Pakistan's largest conglomerates. But here's the thing about Shahzada. Wealth and success weren't what defined him. Ask anyone who knew him and they'd tell you about his curiosity, his passion for learning, his dedication to his family. The Dawood family is one of Pakistan's most prominent families, known not just for their business empire, but for their philanthropy. Shahzada himself was involved in multiple charitable organizations, including the SETI Institute. Yeah, the people who search for extraterrestrial life. That's the kind of mind we're talking about here. And then there's Suleiman, 19 years old, a university student, a kid who loved science fiction, who could solve a Rubik's Cube in seconds, who was obsessed with learning how things worked. Picture this, a teenager who'd rather spend his time reading about space exploration than scrolling TikTok. A young man who was genuinely excited about science and discovery. But here's what makes this story absolutely heartbreaking. Suleiman didn't even want to go on this trip at first. His aunt later revealed that he was terrified of the expedition, absolutely terrified. So why did he go? Father's Day. He went because his dad was excited. He went because it was a chance to bond with his father. He went because sometimes you do things that scare you for the people you love. And that decision would cost him everything. Okay, but let's address the obvious question. Why? Why would anyone pay $250,000 to see a shipwreck? For Shahzada, the Titanic wasn't just a shipwreck. It was a childhood fascination that had followed him his entire life. And honestly, he's not alone in that obsession. If you're in your late 20s to mid-30s right now, you probably remember the cultural phenomenon that was James Cameron's Titanic. It wasn't just a movie, it was the movie. It grossed over $2 billion. It won 11 Oscars. It made us all believe that a door could definitely fit 2 people. But beyond the movie, there's something about the Titanic story that captures the human imagination. The hubris, the tragedy, the unsinkable ship that sank on its maiden voyage. It's a story about human ambition colliding with nature's indifference. And for over a century, that wreck has been sitting 12,500 feet below the surface of the North Atlantic, untouchable, unreachable. Until recently, only a handful of people had ever seen it with their own eyes. Enter Oceangate, a company promising to make the impossible possible, to take everyday people with $250,000 to spare, down to see the Titanic in person.
They called passengers mission specialists. They sold it as an adventure, an expedition, a once-in-a-lifetime experience. And technically, they weren't lying about that last part. For Shahzada, this was a dream, a chance to see history up close, and more than that, a chance to share that experience with his son, to create a memory that would last forever. And it would, just not in the way he hoped.
Now we need to talk about the man behind OceanGate, Stockton Rush. And buckle up, because this is where things start getting really problematic. Rush was a CEO, an engineer, and a pilot. He had a vision to democratize deep-sea exploration, to make it accessible, to move beyond what he called the stifling regulations of the maritime industry. And if that language sounds familiar, it should. Rush was essentially bringing Silicon Valley's move fast and break things philosophy to deep-sea exploration. Now, that philosophy works great when you're disrupting the taxi industry or creating a new social media platform. But when you're building a submarine that's going to crush depth, when you're taking people's lives into your hands 2.5 miles below the ocean, maybe move fast and break things isn't the best approach. Rush's big innovation was the Titan's hull. Instead of using traditional titanium or steel, he used carbon fiber, the same material used in race cars and aircraft. On paper, it sounds brilliant. Carbon fiber is lighter, which means you can make the submersible bigger inside, more room for passengers, more people per trip, more money. But here's the problem. Carbon fiber behaves very differently under compression than it does under tension. And when you're going deep underwater, you're dealing with massive compression forces. We're talking about 6,000 pounds per square inch at Titanic depth. That's like having a fully grown elephant standing on every square inch of the submersible surface. And Rush's cost-cutting didn't stop there. The Titan's controls? A modified Logitech gaming controller. You know, the kind you buy for your PlayStation. The lighting system? Off-the-shelf camping lights from a hardware store. Now, to be fair, Rush would argue that these components were actually more reliable than custom-built alternatives, and he had completed successful dives to the Titanic in 2021 and 2022. But success doesn't equal safety, and as we're about to see, there were warning signs everywhere. Here's where this story goes from concerning to absolutely infuriating, because the problems with the Titan weren't secret, they weren't hidden. People were literally screaming from the rooftops that this was dangerous. In 2018, 5 years before the disaster, more than 30 dozen industry experts, engineers, and scientists sent a letter to Stockton Rush. The Marine Technology Society and the Manned Underwater Vehicles Committee both raised alarms. Their concerns? The experimental design, the lack of third-party safety testing, the decision to bypass classification and certification.
This wasn't just an exploration, it was a demonstration of capability. We are defining the future of deep-sea access.
Let me explain what that means. When you build a submersible, or a plane, or really any vehicle that could kill people if it fails, you typically get it certified by an independent organization. They test it, they inspect it, they make sure it meets safety standards. Rush refused. He called these regulations stifling innovation. He said they were unnecessary. He believed his engineering was sound. But it wasn't just external critics. Former OceanGate employees raised concerns too. David Lockridge, OceanGate's former director of marine operations, wrote a scathing report in 2018 about the Titan's safety flaws. He pointed out problems with the viewport, the hull, the testing procedures. You know what happened to him? He was fired, and OceanGate sued him. Then there's the viewport issue. The Titan's viewing window was rated for depths of 1,300 meters. Sounds impressive, right? Except the Titanic sits at 3,800 meters. That's nearly 3 times deeper than the viewport was designed to handle. And there's more. Reports from previous expeditions mention concerning sounds during dives, hull monitoring systems detecting acoustic anomalies, signs that the carbon fiber might be degrading with each trip.
In 2021, the Titan experienced a lightning strike that damaged its hull. In 2022, there were reports of the hull showing signs of cyclic fatigue, basically the material breaking down from repeated stress. So why did people still get on board? Part of it was the way OceanGate marketed the experience. Passengers weren't called passengers, they were mission specialists. It made them feel like explorers, like pioneers. They signed extensive waivers that mentioned death multiple times. But honestly, when you're paying $250,000 for a trip, when you're caught up in the excitement, when you're about to fulfill a lifelong dream, you don't really think it's going to happen to you. And so, on June 18, 2023, despite every warning, despite every red flag, despite every expert saying this was dangerous, 5 people climbed into the Titan submersible, and they began their descent.
Sunday morning, June 18, 2023, Father's Day. The North Atlantic is relatively calm. The support ship Polar Prince is positioned approximately 400 miles off the coast of Newfoundland, directly above the Titanic's resting place. On board, the 5 people who would soon become the focus of the world's attention. Stockton Rush, 61, CEO and pilot, he would be at the controls. Shahzada Dawood, 48, British-Pakistani businessman, living his dream. Suleiman Dawood, 19, university student, scared but there for his father. Hamish Harding, 58, British billionaire adventurer, a man who'd been to space, the South Pole, and now wanted to see the Titanic. And Paul-Henri Nargeolet, 77, a French maritime expert who'd been to the Titanic wreck over 35 times. If anyone knew what they were getting into, it was him. At 8 a.m., the Titan is released into the water. Picture this moment. You're sitting on the floor of this tube. There's barely room to stretch your legs. It's cold. The only light comes from a few small LEDs. Through the viewport, you watch the surface disappear above you, and you begin to sink. The communication system is basic. The Titan sends text messages to the surface every 15 minutes. Short updates, all good, continuing descent, that kind of thing. No phone, no real-time voice communication, no video feed, just texts. It takes about 2 hours to reach the ocean floor. 2 hours of descending through complete darkness, the water pressure increasing with every passing minute. 100 feet down, pressure doubles. 1,000 feet, pressure increases 20-fold. 3,000 feet, you're at crush depth for nuclear submarines. And they're going to 12,500 feet. At 9:45 a.m., the Polar Prince receives a message from the Titan. All good here. Those would be the last words anyone would ever hear from the Titan. At first, the crew of the Polar Prince isn't too worried. Communication glitches had happened before on previous dives. The Titan had lost contact temporarily and then reconnected. But as minutes turn into hours, concern begins to grow. The Titan should have resurfaced by now. Even if everything went wrong, even if they lost power, the submersible is designed to drop its ballast weights and float back to the surface automatically. But there's nothing, no signal, no visual, no submersible. At 5:40 p.m., more than 8 hours after the last communication, the U.S. Coast Guard is notified. And suddenly, the situation goes from concerning to critical, because now there's a ticking clock that everyone can see. 96 hours of oxygen. 4 days. That's all the time that Titan's passengers have. The response is massive. U.S. Coast Guard, Canadian Coast Guard, Navy vessels, aircraft, remote-operated vehicles, ships from private companies. This becomes one of the largest search and rescue operations in history. Thousands of square miles of ocean to search, and they're looking for something the size of a minivan, somewhere in an area the size of Connecticut.
The media catches wind of the story, and suddenly the whole world is watching.
Breaking news, the global search operation is expanding rapidly. La búsqueda mundial continúa sin descanso. البحث العالمي يتوسع بسرعة.
Social media explodes with speculation, theories, hope, and increasingly dark humor. In Canada, the Dawood family is waiting, hoping, praying. Christine Dawood, Suleiman's mother, Shahzada's wife, holds on to hope. Maybe they're on the surface but can't be seen. Maybe they're stuck on the ocean floor but alive. Maybe. Tuesday night, the oxygen countdown is below 50 hours. Searchers hear something. Banging sounds,
rhythmic, every 30 minutes. Could it be them? Could they be signaling for help? Hope surges. Families are told there's a possible sign of life. Search efforts intensify around the location of the sounds. But experts who know deep-sea acoustics are quietly skeptical. The ocean is a noisy place. Whales, shipping traffic, natural geological sounds. It could be anything. Wednesday morning, the oxygen countdown drops below 24 hours. More resources arrive, specialized equipment, deep-sea ROVs that can go to Titanic depth. But time is running out. If they don't find the Titan soon, even if the passengers are alive, they'll suffocate in the darkness. The pressure on the search teams is immense. Every hour matters. Every minute matters. And then, Thursday morning, June 22nd, 4 days after the Titan disappeared, a Canadian ROV makes a discovery.
The debris field is located just 1,600 feet from the Titanic's bow. Scattered across the ocean floor are pieces of the Titan submersible. The nose cone, the aft end cap, fragments of the pressure hull. At 3 p.m. on June 22nd, the U.S. Coast Guard holds a press conference. The words no one wanted to hear, but many had suspected. The debris is consistent with a catastrophic implosion of the vessel. All 5 people aboard are presumed dead. But here's what makes this even more devastating. They didn't die on June 22nd when the debris was found. They died on June 18th, on that Sunday morning, at 9:45 a.m., the same time they sent that last message, "All good here." The U.S. Navy had detected an acoustic signature consistent with an implosion on Sunday morning, shortly after the Titan lost contact. They just couldn't confirm what it was at the time.
Which means for 4 days, while the world watched and hoped, while ships searched and families prayed, while oxygen countdowns played on every news channel, they were already gone. The banging sounds? Not them. Maybe whales, maybe ship noise, but not them. So what actually happened? Let's talk about the physics of catastrophic implosion. At 12,500 feet deep, the water pressure is approximately 6,000 pounds per square inch. That's about 400 times the pressure at sea level. The carbon fiber hull, which may have been weakened by previous dives, by the lightning strike, by cyclic fatigue, it reached its breaking point. And when it failed fast. We're talking milliseconds, faster than the human brain can process what's happening. The hull collapsed inward, the pressure equalized instantly, and in that same instant, the temperature inside the vessel spiked to thousands of degrees. They never knew what hit them. 1 millisecond, they were sitting in the submersible, looking at their displays, maybe excited about seeing the Titanic. The next millisecond, they were gone. If there's any mercy in this tragedy, it's that death was instantaneous. No drowning, no slow suffocation, no time to be afraid.
But for their families, that's cold comfort. Let's talk about Suleiman Dawood. Because in all the technical details and all the engineering discussions and corporate failures, there was a kid who just wanted to make his dad happy. He brought his Rubik's Cube with him on the dive. He wanted to solve it at the Titanic, to set some kind of personal record, to have a story to tell. He was 19. Think about who you were at 19, what you wanted, what scared you, what you'd do for your parents. His aunt, Azme Daoud, later revealed that Suleiman was terrified. He didn't want to go. But it was Father's Day weekend. His dad was excited, and he didn't want to disappoint him. So he went. He put aside his fear, and he went. Christine Daoud described saying goodbye to them that morning, watching them head out for the adventure. She said Shahazda was like a vibrant little boy. He was so excited. That was the last time she saw them alive. Suleiman was a sophomore at the University of Strathclyde in Scotland. He was studying business. He loved reading. He was into photography. He had friends, plans, dreams about the future. He just started figuring out who he was as an adult, who he wanted to become.
And at 19 years old, in a millisecond of structural failure, all of that potential was erased. The Dawood family released a statement after the tragedy. They talked about Shahazda's love for exploration and learning. They talked about Suleiman's kindness and sense of humor. They thanked the search teams for their efforts. But you can read between the lines. You can feel the grief, the unfairness of it, the what-ifs. What if Suleiman had said no? What if he'd listened to his fear instead of trying to be brave for his father? What if they'd picked literally any other way to spend Father's Day? But they didn't. And now a mother lost her husband and her son in the same moment. Sisters lost their brother and nephew. Friends lost people they cared about. And for what? To see a shipwreck? To have an adventure? No. They died because a company prioritized profit over safety. Because a CEO believed he knew better than decades of engineering expertise. Because warning after warning was ignored. And that brings us to the question everyone wanted answered. Who's responsible?
Within days of the debris field being located, multiple investigations were launched. The U.S. Coast Guard, the Transportation Safety Board of Canada, the National Transportation Safety Board. They recovered pieces of the Titan from the ocean floor, the pressure hull fragments, the titanium end caps, electronic systems. And as they examined the wreckage, the evidence backed up what the whistleblowers had been saying all along. David Lockridge, a former employee who was fired for raising safety concerns, testified at Coast Guard hearings. He described a company culture that prioritized speed and profit over safety, a CEO who became very defensive when questioned about design choices. Other former employees came forward with similar stories, concerns dismissed, safety protocols ignored, a rush to get paying customers to the Titanic. Oceangate suspended all operations indefinitely, which is kind of a moot point because their only submersible is scattered across the ocean floor. But suspension isn't accountability, and families wanted answers. The legal question became, can OceanGate be held liable? Remember those waivers everyone signed? The ones that mentioned death multiple times? Lawyers argued that waivers can't protect companies from gross negligence, that if OceanGate knew about safety problems and took passengers anyway, a waiver doesn't absolve them of responsibility. There's also the question of criminal charges. Did Stockton Rush's decisions rise to the level of criminal negligence? If he were still alive, would he face prosecution? We'll probably never know, but the investigations continue. The hearings continue, and slowly the full picture of what went wrong is emerging. So what do we learn from this? What changes because of the Titan tragedy? First, the obvious. Innovation without safety is just recklessness. Stockton Rush wanted to break barriers, to make exploration accessible. Those are admirable goals. But you don't break safety barriers. You don't skip certifications because they're inconvenient. You don't ignore experts because you think you know better. The deep-sea exploration industry has already changed. Companies are implementing stricter protocols. There's talk of mandatory certification for submersibles carrying passengers. But it's a broader conversation, too. Extreme tourism has exploded in recent years. You can pay to climb Everest, to go to space, to dive with great white sharks. And look, people should be allowed to take risks. Adventure is part of the human experience. But there's a difference between informed risk and being misled about safety. The Titan passengers thought they were taking a calculated risk with a company that knew what it was doing. They didn't know about the extent of the safety concerns. They didn't know about the whistleblowers. They didn't know their viewport was rated for the wrong depth. That's not informed consent. That's negligence. The Dawood family has become advocates for submersible safety. They don't want their loss to be in vain. They want regulations that will prevent this from happening again. Christine Dawood established scholarships in Shahzada and Suleiman's names, supporting young people interested in science and exploration, turning tragedy into something that helps others. And maybe that's the real legacy here. Not the failure of the Titan, but the reminder that human life is precious, that cutting corners has consequences, that some dreams aren't worth dying for. Because at the end of the day, this wasn't about submersibles or engineering or even the Titanic. It was about a father who wanted to share something special with his son. It was about a 19-year-old kid who faced his fears because he loved his dad. It was about 5 people who trusted a company with their lives and paid the ultimate price for that trust. And it was about the hundreds of people who loved them and have to live with this loss every single day.
On June 18th, 2023, Shahzada Dawood wanted to show his son the impossible. He wanted to share a moment of wonder 12,500 feet below the surface of the Atlantic Ocean. He wanted to see the Titanic, the ship that represented both human ambition and human tragedy. Suleiman, despite his fears, went because he loved his father. Because sometimes you do things that scare you for the people you care about. Because he wanted to create a memory that would last forever. They did create a lasting memory, just not the one they hoped for. 5 lives were lost that day, not because of bad luck, not because of an unforeseeable accident, but because warnings were ignored, because corners were cut, because profit was valued over safety. Because one man believed he could outsmart physics. We remember them not for how they died, but for who they were. Stockton Rush, 61, engineer, CEO, explorer. Shahzada Dawood, 48, businessman, philanthropist, devoted father. Suleiman Dawood, 19, student, son, dreamer. Amish Harding, 58, adventurer, record holder, father of 2. Paul-Henri Nargelet, 77, maritime expert, Mr. Titanic, devoted to ocean exploration. They were explorers, dreamers, fathers and sons, people with families who loved them and futures that were cut short. And maybe the best way to honor their memory is to make sure it never happens again, to demand safety, to question authority, to remember that some adventures aren't worth the risk.
If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you never miss our deep dives into the stories that matter. Share this video to keep their memory alive and to spread awareness about the importance of safety in extreme tourism. And let us know in the comments, do you think there should be stricter regulations on extreme tourism? Should adventure come with mandatory safety certifications? We want to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching, and remember, some adventures aren't worth the risk. Take care of yourselves and the people you love.